internet, now, then, and shall be all pleasure, no end to it, but an eternal beginning. Why are you crying?
I'm pregnant.
And so it ends. My name is Matthew Kroll.
And I'm a very pregnant Shahir Dow.
And this is the only podcast about movies, specifically the 1971 specialty that Shahir has been talking about and fans have requested, The Devils.
Well, one fan in particular.
Millions of fans have requested.
So on Twitter, we got a request from, her handle is @Ray, asking us to check out The Devils by Ken Russell, specifically with the question, what the fuck did I just watch? And I wouldn't mind you guys checking it out.
Thanks.
I was excited about this.
Well, you went and bought books about it, and did you have 2 books about it here? You came over with the British release DVD.
I didn't read any of that. I'm just slamming it down just as a method of intimidation.
Oh, I got it.
Podcast.
Oh no, it worked.
I haven't read anything
because I watched the film you gave me and made me watch, and Ray made me watch.
So if you like Ray and you want to get in touch with us with a request, do so at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter @onlymoviepod. You can also check out our brand spanking new website, onlymoviepodcast.com, or check us out on Facebook, where again we're still arguing about Marvel movies forever and ever. Doctor Strange is coming out. Reviews are starting to drop. It's going to be interesting.
Yes.
But Matt, The Devils, 1971. Is this the oldest film we've done? This might be.
It could be.
It could be the oldest.
I'll go through the back catalog, but it could be. It could very well be.
47 years old, this film.
Yeah. You gave it to me on the old
had you
Region 2 disc that I had to bust out my old Region Free player.
Had you heard of this film before?
No, I had not. Not before Ray had suggested it, and then you fell down into the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I did fall down into the rabbit hole. Like you said, I brought a bunch of books. So the way I saw this film is that I was given a bootleg copy amongst a series of films on a Blu-ray many years ago. And I watched it, and I thought it was pretty astounding. I was pretty surprised by it because the only context I'd been given about it was a banned film. And here's a little thing about me, which is that I was at one point contemplating doing my PhD on the history of censorship in cinema.
Okay.
It's an area I'm very, very interested in. I've given talks about censorship. I'm fairly well read on the subject and wanted to explore it to much further. There's all sorts of really weird anecdotes about censorship I give you. And here's just one quick one.
Give me one. You say there's a bunch of them.
Well, here's in New Zealand, the movie Ulysses.
Oh, it's a New Zealand anecdote?
Well, this was reported in Time magazine in the United States when it happened. But the movie Ulysses was censored in New Zealand in a really unusual way, which is that in the late 70s, they decided, an adaptation of James Joyce's Ulysses was coming out, and they decided this was high art, so it needed to be seen.
Sure.
But it had the first utterance of the word fuck in it.
Oh.
And so censors were kind of baffled, what to do with that, and how are we going to deal with that? And the way New Zealand censors came up with it was kind of unusual, which is they decided, okay, the general public can see this movie, but men and women can't see it together. So literally, they would have an audience divided on one side with men and one on the other side with women. Usually, the theater was stacked so that the upper level was women and the lower level was men. And that's just one of a bunch of stories of censorship that I think is really interesting.
Censorship is weird. 9 times out of 10, it just calls more attention to the thing you're supposedly not trying to call attention to.
But not in this particular case. So Ken Russell's The Devils, a film about the 1630s in a small town of Loudun, France, where
I have the description from IMDb if you want it.
Let me see if I can mumble my way through it if I can, because I'm so well versed in it now, having read 2 books on the subject and seen the film
This
twice.
is your show. Go.
A small town in provincial France where a convent of Ursuline nuns are succumbed to possession by the supposed devil in the form of a very masculine priest by the name of Urbain Grandier, played by the late, great Oliver Reed. And their form of possession is gyrating and sexually jumping around as a way of suggesting that Urbain Grandier has possessed them. And in the true story, and there's spoilers for the film, Urban Grandier was burned to the stake for the crime of demonic possession.
You hear that? He just spoiled the 1971 film for you.
And with that in mind, I'm going to say this. We are going to spoil this film to a great degree right off the bat, and I've already done it, but this is a true story, so you'll find it out, and the film is very, very old. But one thing I do want to say is everyone should listen to this episode without worrying about that, because this film is actually really hard to come across, for reasons that we'll get into in a little bit. It is very difficult to get your hands on a copy of this film.
Did Ray say how she got a hold of it, like who showed it to her or why she was watching?
No, I did ask her that, but we didn't get an answer.
Okay, well, Ray, if you let us know, I'm curious how you came about this.
Yeah, because I had to buy a copy on eBay, and it was a British Region 2 DVD.
2.
Which is very difficult to play. So even if you can get a copy of the DVD, it's hard to actually play it. Now, there are bootleg copies, but the problem is that this film has undergone severe censorship, and it has never been reinstated. So the complete cut is not available. There is the film critic in the UK, Mark Kermode, has been championing releasing a cut that he did in 2004 where he found certain scenes that had been excised from the film. But unfortunately, Warner Brothers, who owns the rights to the film, will not permit him to do so. So, Matt, the version that you saw did not have certain scenes that I'm going to talk about later on.
Great.
And so I have a particular interest in film censorship. So that's one of the things. That's the thing that I'm most interested in with this film. I'm not a particular champion of the film itself, though I do think it is masterfully made. I guess it's just not one of those films that captured my imagination. Other than when I saw it for the first time, I thought, "Wow, this is actually a pretty terrific film," and it's amazing to me that this is a censored film.
I mean, just sort of first thoughts about the entire thing. I think it does a lot of stuff. It's almost like a preamble for a lot of sort of technique and whatnot. Like, it seems like the techniques they use, cinematography, a couple other things, feel more current than a 1971 film from time to time.
Yeah.
So that stuff I was very impressed with.
But what did you? I mean, like you're coming to this completely fresh. And I'll talk about what the history of this film and what people think about it, but what do you think about it?
I mean, the first thing I noticed straight up was it basically had the visual style and the pacing and the way the script was written as if it was a play.
Right.
It felt very stage-like, which isn't a bad thing. It's just one of those things that I adjust to after the first 5 or 10 minutes. I was like, oh, okay, this is what I'm watching.
Right.
It felt very like stage, even like to the point, and not, this isn't a detriment to it because it's consistent, and as you know, consistency is king in my world. So like the sets seemed like sort of play sets, and like but like they all seemed like they fit. It just seemed like, oh, now we're in the nunnery, and this is the thing they wheeled out to be the. I don't know. I just felt it felt.
It's a very highly stylized film, and the sets were actually built by director Derek Jarman before he became known as a famous director.
Shouts out. So I was saying and so for the shock value and the censorship value, like there's shocking stuff in this. I get it, and there's stuff that It's interesting when we get into sort of what's the point of the movie, right? Well, which we'll talk about in a little bit. That like I kept going back and forth, and I'll tell you where I landed at the end. I'm like, are they just doing this to do it? Like all the shocking shit they're doing, are they just doing that shit to be like get a rise out of people or get people to get sort of publicity for this thing to be quote censored? And I'll get into sort of what I thought about that. So I can see why the PTB powers that be sort of did what they did. But
acronym central today.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. What else did I think about this? So like it moved at a good pace, and overall, I really liked that the picture it sort of painted, and it's not painted, I think, nearly enough in my headspace, but as how it's basically the government using religion to further its agenda. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another reason why I think even beyond the shocking scenes of sexual promiscuity and some religious iconography being defiled, I think that another sort of version, and maybe you can fill me in on this, Shahir, but the censorship is also probably for the way it painted governments handling religion to do fucked up shit.
No.
Well, then they're dumb, because that would be the main reason why I would not like fucking vaginas.
That's not the reason they censored it. And in fact, the reason they censored it is still hotly debated to this day. But there are many reasons they censored it. And we will talk about that to some degree. Here's something I'm going to read you from Richard Krause's book, Ken Russell and the Unmaking of the Devils, Raising Hell. Here are some reviews that came out at the time.
Perfect.
Charles Champlin, not to be confused with Charles Chaplin, of the Los Angeles Times, called the film a degenerate and despicable piece of art. Judith Christ, again, appropriately named.
What the fuck?
In New Yorker said, we can't recall our relatively broad experience, 400 movies a year for perhaps too many years, a fouler film. So, and here's another thing. Iconoclast magazine called it a film which had all the taste and restraint of a 3-day gangbang. And publications like Harry and Baltimore bizarrely called it Goebbels and Drag.
All right.
So this was not a popular film of its time, and in fact, the poster for the film said, "The Devils is not a film for everyone."
I mean, hey, honesty in advertising, I will take 100% over things being super fucked up.
But this is what Warner Brothers said about it, and this was an interesting, I think, an interesting point to take about it. Was that they took out a quarter-page ad in the New York Magazine, and they said, this is a true story, carefully documented, historically accurate, a serious work by a distinguished filmmaker. As such, it is to be hailed as a masterpiece by many. But because this is Warner Brothers advertising their own movie.
Amazing.
But because it is explicit and highly graphic in depicting the bizarre events that occurred in France in 1634,
of course,
others will find it visually shocking and deeply disturbing. In other words, Warner Brothers were kind of saying, look, we think this film is pretty good, but most of you probably won't.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Now, the film has been championed by many a filmmaker to date. Bryan Singer has come out and talked about how much he loves it. Guillermo del Toro is so passionate about it.
I'm sure he's all over this thing.
He says that he tries to watch it at least once a week, or at least scenes from it once a week. And he owned a VHS copy of it and watched it. He said he definitely watched it once a week before he became a very busy guy.
That's weird. I guess it makes sense.
He thinks this is Russell's best film. Now, you got to understand the context of Ken Russell as well. Ken Russell was coming off a D.H. Lawrence adaptation, Woman in Love, where he was nominated for an Academy Award. So he was considered the kind of merchant ivory of his time, and this was a serious film, an adaptation of an Aldous Huxley novel,
right?
About a demonic possession from 1634. So it was
quote demonic.
Yeah, but it was kind of like, we're doing, this is serious masterclass theater that's going to go on. So people aren't like looking at this film in a way that's going to be salacious. And the interesting thing that happened was that Russell actually sent Warner Brothers the script beforehand, and it was completely approved. Everyone saw it, read it, was like, yep, cool. He even sent the script to the chief censor in Britain at the time, who said, I think this is going to be good. Here are a couple of things that you should probably tweak, like knowing what the censor's job is going to be. But, I think this is going to be great. And then, and it had cast Oliver Reed, who's just amazing, commands every scene he's in.
Sure.
And Vanessa Redgrave, two major actors of the time.
Sure, yeah.
And then suddenly he showed the film to both the British censors and Warner Brothers, who'd financed the film. And that's when things went very wrong.
I just have a hard time believing that exactly what we saw on screen was written down verbatim. Like, I think you could... I could take this movie if I had the time and or energy and write a script that seemed really good and like danced around stuff and maybe made it sound like it was going to be a little more coy than it was.
Well, the thing is, Russell again was kind of not quite at the level of someone like Lindsay Anderson or Stanley Kubrick at the time. Kubrick's not British, but moved to Britain and was kind of preeminent filmmaker. But he was a well-respected, highly regarded filmmaker. So he had no reason to lie about what he was going to make. And also, Warner Brothers were, this was his first studio film, so Warner Brothers were putting up the money for everything. And the set...
Not a lie, it's fibbing.
No, and the set that you're talking about was the most expensive, biggest set ever built in Pine Studios at the time.
Huh.
So this was not a small production. Everyone knew what was going on. Like, for example, there's notes in Richard Krause's books of what they talked about when the nuns were, told that this is what they're going to have to do in the scenes, So they were press releases sent out. Like people were talking about this film as it was being made. But suddenly, I think and remember also 1971, this was just a couple of years before The Exorcist, around the same time as A Clockwork Orange came out. So people were used to this idea that cinema was getting risky. It was getting dangerous. There were films coming out that were going to be taking chances. The other one is Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dog.
Right.
And remember, just a few years later, The Exorcist came out, released by Warner Brothers, which had a young girl masturbating with a crucifix saying, "Jesus can fuck me in hell." So the idea that this film now,
so that kind of brings me to my other point of like why things are censored, and I know we'll get into it, but like, so there's a bunch of stuff sort of similar to that here, but that's why I thought, maybe it was the sort of the government bashing that really like was the real true reason, even though they're like, no, there's boobies in this, we have to censor it. Like,
actually, the thing that they had the most problem with is pubic hair. Honestly, it's a note that Ken Russell got was like, cut all the pubic hair out of the film, which you could do digitally now, but back then they had to actually just cut the scenes out of the film.
They had to color it by hand. They had to animate it by hand. They got Walt Disney Imagineers.
There are actually versions of the film where they pinked out the pubic hair. Very rudimentary painting that they did frame by frame. But I believe the reason why this film is censored there's a couple of old wives' tales about why this film was censored. One that I love that I don't believe is true in any way, shape, or form, but I think is kind of fun to think about, is that apparently the print of the film is sitting in a Warner Brothers vault, and when you open it, there's a note from a very, very senior executive on it saying, "This film shall never see the light of day." And every Warner Brother executive that has come since that period has opened the film, because the film has been requested to be released, almost every year since it's been made, has opened the vault and seen that note and said, "Oh, we're not messing with that." So that
I don't know if I buy that.
It's an old wives' tale. The reason I think it's complicated is that films like The Exorcist, for example, offer up a fairly singular view about what is good and what is evil. There is the devil and there is God. And in The Exorcist, for example, the supernatural exists. So there is God and there is the devil. The thing about the devils is there is no element of supernatural play here. What the film is really about is the way in which people manipulate faith in order to control people.
Yes.
So good and evil is not a binary that this film works in. And I think, another interesting thing is that the good guy in this film,
it's kind of a scumbag.
He's not a hero. He does things that are...
Well, he does things... Look, in certain circles, he's a hero. For instance, he fights for the town. He fights to not have the King of France knock down their barricades because they were kind of doing that all over the time, like after the war or whatever.
That's something I didn't find in Huxley's novel, so I think it's a little bit of a fabrication on Russell's part to kind of like...
To make him more heroic in the movie?
No, to make the actual reasoning for why they're trying to persecute Urbain Grandier a little more relevant. I think that's
right. So basically, I mean, I want to try to, I know we've been sort of dancing around it, and I want to try to say very sort of as simply as possible, then we'll dive deep into sort of what happens here. So again, spoilers. But basically, this very handsome priest, Grandier, he's a womanizer. He womanizes all over the place. Like the quote we said in the beginning, he's sleeping with a young lady and then she gets pregnant and he basically leaves her. He's kind of a scumbag. And then as the king of France is trying to like basically control all of France by in the film they're doing this. I don't know how real this is, but they take these towns that have all their garrisons and barricades and whatnot, and they're destroying them so they can be more easily controlled and not their own sort of like individual states that would like maybe go against the crown if they didn't agree with them.
What they were primarily concerned with is, and this was in Huxley's novel, is a Protestant uprising. So there were the Catholics and the Protestants. And
so they were worried they could use these towns as sort of like like a beachhead sort of nonsense.
And the thing about Loudun was that it had a very mild Protestant
That's
uprising.
the town that this all takes place in.
Yeah, and Loudun had a very mild Protestant uprising, and to the point where Loudun had a fairly harmonious coexistence between Catholic and Protestant.
Right. So the mayor of this town dies, or whoever is in charge, and he leaves, weirdly enough, this priest who everyone respects, even though he's kind of a womanizer. Like, everyone in the town likes Grandier, except for, obviously, like, the father of the woman he impregnates and all that jazz.
Yeah.
So then he goes and he stops the demolition from happening because the king didn't have his edict with him. And then this starts like a downward spiral of how can the government agents, this baron, a couple other people, how can they tear this man apart enough where the whole town will turn against him and make it seem like that whatever they're going to do is fine. And they do that by using the thing that he's kind of a scumbag for against him, and that is being a womanizer. Like, all these nuns in this convict, they always like look out like to see how beautiful Grandier is, and like, you know, his luscious facial hair and whatnot. And it's interesting. So they find out about that, and then they use that, and that's how they sort of like they whip these nuns up into a fervor about this and kind of see, that's the weird part. They don't convince them that they're possessed, but like it's almost like a weird mob mentality that slowly forms through what's her name's nun, the
Vanessa Redgrave's
Vanessa Redgrave's sister Janine.
Sister Jeanne.
Oh, Jeanne?
Yeah.
Janine. Yo, Janine.
Well, I actually think it's a little bit more of a coincidence that occurred. So Huxley has this great passage I'm going to read. This is the first Huxley novel that I've ever read. And it is beautiful. I am now a fan of Huxley. I think, I've long been overdue reading.
And what's the title of this book, this particular one you're talking about?
The Devils of Loudun.
Thank you.
And that's what the film is based upon, as well as a play that was written at the time. But I'm long overdue to read A Brave New World in the Island now as well. But Huxley, basically, this is a true story that he just found out about and just thought about for a long period of time. And so what his novel is trying to do, it's a true distillation of what happened. And he's trying to figure out the historical, psychological context for which this would occur. Because the thing that happened is that what came first is the hysteria about Grandier. And Sister Jeanne was kind of had some form of psychosis, but she also lived in a time where female hysteria was not widely understood. So her sexual thoughts about Grandier were misinterpreted as hysteria, and because she's also a celibate nun living in a convent who has this sort of
she's a hunchback.
She has this deformed hunch.
Yeah.
She basically starts believing that Grandier has possessed her, even though what's really happening is that she is infatuated with him, sexually infatuated with him, but doesn't know how to deal with that.
Yeah.
And then what happens?
Thanks, history.
Well, thanks our lack of understanding.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And what happens is that in the true story, at least, Grandier offended Cardinal Richelieu, who you see in the film as being Louis XIII's right-hand man, trying to take over, to instigate this thing. But what had actually happened is Grandier had just offended him. And to offend the cardinal was, for lack of a better term, a cardinal sin.
Whoa.
And so the cardinal, alongside Laubardemont, had, basically seized upon this notion that these women felt that they were being possessed and stoked the fire of that a little bit. And eventually,
a little bit.
Eventually, the hysteria grew into something much bigger, to the point at which they hired an exorcist. An exorcist came about. They would have public exorcisms where the nuns were encouraged to writhe around sexually, because essentially they were being told, well, if you are being possessed by the devil, then you must demonstrate that to us. And so suddenly these nuns, who are all very celibate and well-to-do and very proper, were basically given carte blanche to act, completely sexually free. And so they seized upon the opportunity to do it. And all of this happened without any meeting between Grandier and Sister Jeanne. They never actually met.
Right.
So, like the story is that she asked Grandier to become the parishioner for the convent.
And he's like, nah, I'm busy.
He's busy. And he actually, the reason she asked was that he tossed over a bunch of roses into their convent one day as he was walking past. But Huxley had this great passage about why people were obsessed with Grandier. Now, I think it's perfectly encapsulated in the casting of Oliver Reed. I think he just owns every scene he's in. Plus, the dialogue that he's given is just amazing.
There's a lot of good speechifying here.
I think it's just beautiful. And the thing that startled me on this viewing was how good the writing was. But Huxley writes, how fascinating, even to the most respectable of ladies, is the professional seducer, the hardened breaker of hearts. In the imaginations of the female parishioners, Grandier's amorous exploits took on heroic proportions. He became a mythical figure, part Jupiter, part satyr, bestially lustful, and yet therefore divinely attractive. And compound this with the idea that he's a priest who shouldn't be
doing this.
Yeah, he's kind of just basically the bad boy of Loudun rocking around.
He's the Fonzie of this French time.
I mean, he's getting, women knocked up. He's marrying women in secret. He's having affairs.
Bumping that jukebox.
Yeah, he's just the coolest guy in town. But it's interesting as well is that for, and we still see this today, that for a man to be amorously sexual is a grace, whereas for a woman to do it is a detriment. So I think that,
which is not right.
Of course it's not right, but it's the world we live in,
Right.
You'd only have to look to this year's election to see some of that playing around.
Thank God it's almost fucking over.
Yeah. So, while I think, the other side of that is I think Russell's adaptation of the book in adding the streamlining of the king wanting to tear down the walls of this town is actually a really smart invention in order to get us to understand
I think
why
so
this
too.
is happening.
Let me ask you this. So there's one part of this we're kind of leaving out and I thought was a little bit, I felt tacked on and I didn't know if it was historically accurate because, side note, this movie, just so you know, I know we're jumping back between the book and the story and the history and the whatever, blah, blah, blah. This movie opens with the most blatant text I have ever seen at the beginning of a based on a true story film. It's like everything in this film is fact. This, that, and the other thing. It's like a 3-sentence long thing about how true this movie is. And I was like, and after I watched the movie, I was like, whoa.
Now, here's the thing. I read a lot of novels before I see the films and try to compare what went wrong. This adaptation is, if we take Huxley's novel as historical truth,
sure.
This adaptation is really, really close.
But how do we know that's true? We don't? Or we do?
Well, Huxley famously did a lot of research and he cites his sources.
Okay,
so
cool.
it's a historical fiction.
As close as we're going to get.
And the film is very, very close. It's a very good adaptation.
So this is my question that I thought felt tacked on, maybe like the walls and the city, sort of the political, the very clear political goal that they sort of tacked in was Grandier's eventual love interest / wife,
Madeleine de Brou.
Yes,
true story.
Really,
a true story, and to the point, and so, the reason we know it's true as well is that he married her in secret.
So he falls in love, basically, just so you know, so we're not just talking through this without you, because you might not have seen this. Probably
there
not.
There is a woman that Grandier
falls in love with after giving her mother the last rites, also kicking out the comic relief of the film, the doctor and the chemist.
And a crocodile.
Jesus, that was friggin' ridiculous. Old medicine was fucked up.
Yeah.
And he falls in love with her. This is something I thought was a poor move. Not a poor move. The only poorly done relationship in this film was how quickly her and Grandier's relationship is all of a sudden, boop, they're in love. It was very okay, this happened.
I think the thing that's interesting there is you can understand why she's attracted to Grandier, but you're not sure why he's attracted to her.
They didn't even give it one of the grand speeches to have you get on Grandier's page. It was just sort of oh, now I'm in love with you so much. It's great.
From a visual point of view, I think the thing that I took away that made it work for me is that she is the essence of purity in this film. She is innocence. She is true faith.
I guess.
And that's why he's attracted to her.
But she came to do sexy confession just like every other woman did to him too. So
she confesses in a way that's honest and true. She kind of says, "I love you," and I have feelings for you. Where everyone else kind of dances around it.
Yeah, I don't know. I felt like it was not forced, just too quick.
Yeah.
But so when I experienced that sort of part of it, I was like, that feels tacked on to help us like him more. But I guess
it's a true
there we
thing.
go.
And he wrote, the thing about it was that obviously a priest having
a wife is bad,
but he actually wrote a pamphlet about how false celibacy for priests should be and how it's unnecessary. And he actually addressed it to his concubine, which was Madeleine de Breux.
Oh, gee, if only there was a film that I didn't particularly like that told the story about that story.
Spotlight.
Yeah.
I heard you on the Oscar Watch podcast discussing that. And
look, I don't know why people invite me back to keep talking about it.
I was holding onto a table and parts of it broke off as I listened to you guys talk about that film. But anyway, moving along. So that's true. What are other questions that you might have, or other things that you wanted to talk about in terms of the film?
So, I mean, let's talk about, I'm not going in particular sort of order, but let's talk about the portrayal of Louis XIII.
Right. So Ken Russell might be famously known for his adaptation of the Who's album, Tommy. And
goddamn pinball wizard.
Yeah, the pin, sure plays a mean pinball. So Russell is a fabulist. He is someone who can be surreal in cinema.
Yes.
And I think, there's two examples of that in this film.
The opening,
which I think is just beautiful.
It's great. It's like a giant play.
Basically, King Louis is doing an adaptation of
The Birth of Venus.
The Birth of Venus on
for the
stage.
Cardinal.
Yeah, for the Cardinal.
And for a big group of people, the Cardinals
but it's also playing on Louis' sexuality at that point as well. The other, there's that, and there's the crocodile, which I think is just hilarious and kind of a wonderful piece of just madness.
So what happens is when this doctor and the chemist that sort of show up and are kind of like side villains in a weird way by the end of it.
They're comic relief as well.
They're trying to cure this woman from the plague.
Yeah.
And so they're doing the whole thing. They're doing a little bit of leeches, but then they put hornets in glasses. And then Grandier, when he comes in to give her last rites, because what was her?
Madeleine de Breux.
Yeah, thank you. Calls him from the street she's gonna die, whatever. Then he comes and he's like, "What are you doing? There aren't any leeches here. You're just putting random." And he "Is this a crocodile?" And he pulls it she's lying on top of a dead crocodile. And then he throws it out the window. And then eventually, after the last rites are read, he walks outside, and the father of the woman he impregnated, or a bit ago, but he just found out. Yeah. He tries to attack Grandier with a sword, and Grandier eventually fights back with the crocodile. And I'm like,
I thought that scene was hilarious, and I thought
it was funny, but it didn't fit.
I think, to me, it played on the absurdity of the film that was trying to get, that the film was trying to get at. And I think
this film is a film that takes itself oddly seriously, except for moments that happen like that.
Yeah.
And it's almost this is what I got from it. I'm not saying it's bad. I laughed and I was like, what the fuck? And it didn't take any enjoyment away from me, but it did take it took some teeth out of it for me with the crocodile, oddly enough. So it was just this scene is existing in the same scene where Janine, Sister Janine, is having a fantasy about Grandier being Jesus and reking his blood and getting some real serious shit, licking his wounds. So
but the thing is, the reason I laughed at that is that the thing that I was kind of thinking about was Grandier's crocodile tears. And I thought that was kind of a visual metaphor for that. That might, it's a bit loose, but it could be. The other scene that happens later on in the film.
The crows?
Yeah, with the crows, where King Louis is basically out hunting. And
not out hunting. He's sitting on a pedestal and then
firing.
He's basically making prisoners of some kind run in crow outfits away from him, and he's just shooting them with pistols as they go.
I'm pretty sure Terry Gilliam might have ripped that off in The Life of Brian or something.
Yeah, it felt very Monty Python.
Yeah, and I just. Yes, those things are strikingly absurd.
Louis XIII might be my favorite character in this movie.
Well, because he has that great scene later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see how those, and
he's the Dr. Frankenfooter of this movie.
And I think the thing is that Ray's question, which was what the fuck did I just watch, certainly alludes to scenes like that. What is going on in this movie where a man is being attacked and defending himself with a crocodile, and where another, the king is.
But then at the same time, nuns are being probed and
which happened. It was called An Exorcism by Enema, which is graphically detailed in Aldous Huxley's book. But yeah, so there is a certain level of absurdity to this film. I want to point out just basically Ray's questions to us that she'd asked us.
Sure.
Which I think we've actually already answered was...
Have we? Have we answered anything?
Well, her main question was, is this a true story? And was Grandier a real historic figure? And how much of this film do you think has been dramatized for the sake of an entertaining story?
Okay, so we got those.
I think the only thing that it did happen, but not quite connected to the story, was the tearing down of Ludan's walls.
Because that's another thing. So I liked it. I liked that aspect of the movie, him being sort of like a hero to his town in a weird way, despite the fact he was a womanizer and not she shouldn't have because he was a fucking
He
priest.
wasn't quite that in
real life
in Huxley's story.
No, I know. So like, but I
think it's a good way to actually like
because it painted it. It just gave him. It made more of a case for him than if he had just like pissed off the cardinal, because then it was almost like a coalition of people he had pissed off came together to sort of whip up this thing. So there was the cardinal.
Yeah.
There was the baron who was trying to actually tear down the walls. There was the father who he fought with the crocodile of the woman he impregnated. There were the doctor and the chemist that he basically said were quacks and to get the fuck out. Mm-hmm. And then there was that other priest guy, Father Mignon, who I don't remember how exactly he wronged.
So he was actually the cousin of Monsieur Tricont. So
I see. That was not clear.
But also, he in the true story, he's actually 85 years old, and in this film, he's kind of like
super
30 something.
Well, he's got a fuck.
Yeah. Well, and he basically took on the role of being the parishioner for the convent when Grandier didn't turned it down.
Yep.
So yeah, and basically, and they talk about basically those are the Carmelites. A group of people who had come together in order to bring about Grandier's downfall.
And delicious caramel.
Exactly. Actually, every time I read that word, I was like, Carmelites? Do they have anything to do with caramel? Because I'm really hungry reading this.
New from Wonka. Now in enema flavor.
But the thing that I, you have to remember as well is that this was a highly politicized time where religion was, on the one hand, by the elites known to be false, but on the other hand, by the people known to be the reason for existence.
Sure.
So you had this kind of like swirling mass of people kind of like coming together around this idea of religion. On the one hand, people understanding that it's just made up. And on the other hand, people believing that this is the way we live our lives. And so the slight that Grandier had made against the people was also a slight against God in the eyes of Richelieu, who was the cardinal who was all powerful.
Gotcha.
And who had God on his side kind of thing. So it's kind of like, like me saying I don't believe in God right now is not seen as much. But if I said that in public in 1634 France, I would be seen as a heretic and someone to be taken down, and I would be publicly denounced. And
your accent would be very confusing to them.
To the French, no doubt. And in this case, the film, indeed, because it's all in English. But, so I think the addition of tearing down the walls adds a kind of like very tangible political dimension.
You know what I liked? I just remembered this. So the plague's going on, and before he goes or whatever, there's literally people with a cart and dead bodies yelling, "Bring out your dead," which I know that Monty Python must have ripped that off from them, right?
Yeah, bring out your dead. I'm sure.
Ringing the bell, bring out your dead, and then the whole "I'm not dead yet."
Gilliam talks about it. He actually is referenced in Krause's book, and he says that I wish I'd stolen those ideas from Ken Russell because he did them better than I did. But we did come up with them organically, but I can certainly see why.
Yeah, if I was like, yes.
But I think, the thing about Russell is Russell has a sense of humor. And the way someone described him in Krause's book is that he's an intellectual who pulls down his pants and shows you his butt. That's he's very smart, and you can see that in the film.
Sure.
But he's also someone that enjoys indulgence. He was known to be a man
but enjoys ass play.
Yeah, he enjoys poking fun and things. The other thing to note about Russell that I think it turns up in the film as well is he was a deeply religious man. He was a Catholic, and who truly believed. And I think the thing was, though, he was also an intellectual who doesn't believe that things should be taken as doctrine and things and ideas of Catholicism should be played with. So he wasn't someone who was he was religious himself, and he believed in a God and a Catholic God, but he didn't believe that it was all prim and proper. He believed sex was part of the existence of God, and he liked to inject that into his film. So
with enemas.
Well, that is.
I'm just every time you're saying something that remotely goes back to it, I have to call it.
It did actually happen, and it's
fucking terrifying.
So what Matt's talking about is that when Sister Jeanne is is decided to be possessed by the devils, they hire another high priestess, Bar, who looks like a rock star in this movie. He's wearing these sort of like John Lennon glasses.
He looks like a younger version of the villain in The Crow.
Okay, that's a deep cut that I probably won't remember. I've seen.
Also looks like my uncle when he was younger. Very strange. Let's just keep going.
To me, he looks like he wandered off the set of The Who, of Tommy.
Yeah,
you know, like he looks like he should be in that film. But I kind of dig that kind. Again, it's part of that sort of anachronistic visual style that this film has, and he performs a colonic on Sister Jeanne, an enema. Which is decidedly painful, obviously, and completely unnecessary. But she goes along with it because she believes that she is possessed by the demon Grandier, and she and you know
what the fuck.
The thing about this, the hysteria that these women encounter, and the thing that I found really interesting in the book was the way that demonic possession was really codified by the church. You know, like they actually had rules for how you determine
and they still do.
And they still do. And you know, like the rules were things like you had to prove that you could levitate. You know, like you had to prove that could happen. You had to prove that you could speak in tongues.
That one's easy.
And you also had to prove that if you were bled at a certain point, there would be a lack of blood. And the thing was that Grandier actually agreed to undergo all of those tests and failed them all. But the way in which they believed that the devil operated was that the devil understood what their rules were so that he could defy them anyway. So they had these rules, but if you didn't, you know, pass the rules, you could just basically forego the rules because the devil is just an evil bastard and can do whatever he wants anyway. And they would.
How do you know she is a witch?
Exactly, and they would go into details where, like, you know, like the Sister Jeanne would say that she had a devil inside her left nostril, and they were like, well, this is the site of the devil, and you know, and they would give it a name, and it would last, and they basically created this entire mythology that ran through the entire convent, which is just, it's crazy. That's in the book. I feel like that's one of the things that the movie doesn't really go into.
How can you tell if she is made of wood? Build a bridge out of her. That's all. I mean, look, Holy Grail does a lot with this material, even if it's coincidence. It's kind of weird.
I love it. So
So Bar comes, right? Yeah. And I would call Bar sort of the villain if there is a, well, I mean, the cadre of the Carmels, what were they called?
The Carmelites.
The Carmelites?
Yeah.
The brethren to the California Raisins. The Carmelites and Bar's like this sort of like rock star exorcist, but like he's just starting to like go along with it because it seemed like he was getting notoriety at this point, and like all the men in this scenario in the film, and I don't know about the book or the history or whatever, but just basically like taking advantage of these women doing all of this sexual promiscuous stuff. Like there was a part where like they were outside and like Bar was like in the middle of them, and he's like, there was a moment where he like literally put up his hands like, oh no, what am I gonna do?
Yeah.
Like it's,
and there's a scene which I don't believe you saw, Matt, in the cut that I gave you.
Okay.
One of Ray's questions,
keeping things from me.
Yeah, one of Ray's questions is what was taken out of this film because of censorship, and the one of the most infamous scenes is called "The Rape of Christ." Where, you know, a good title. Where the nuns basically are writhing naked and sexually, and they grab a crucifix of Christ and they start masturbating on top of it, and it's called the Rape of Christ. And Father Mignon climbs upon the church bells and watches from above and starts to masturbate as he does. And there's this amazing sort of like crash zooms that go on between the Rape of Christ and Father Mignon masturbating, which Joe Dante is a real fan of this movie, and he directed The Burbs, which I think has that same famous crash zoom when Tom Hanks discovers the femur. And the other scene that was taken out, again relating to Joe Dante.
So far, I don't feel like I'm missing anything.
It's a pretty important scene because the way in which it depicts the madness of this and the way and I think the thing about,
I mean, I got it. Like, I mean, look, this is what I'm saying about, and I haven't seen the scene, so I can't say if it's like super crucial, but I will say that I guess unless this is like totally historically proven that this moment happened,
Yeah.
I don't know if I need it. I got the hysteria. And I'm not saying people shouldn't see something like this. I don't give a fuck. I'm saying if I was cutting this not even from a censorship standpoint and just from like a time standpoint or a pacing standpoint or whatever, I'd be like, maybe that scene could go, or maybe a different one that had similar context. I feel like I got things with that context throughout the cut that I saw.
So the way I would talk about this is in reference to a movie I just watched, which we're going to talk about later in the podcast, Hacksaw Ridge, which is the new Mel Gibson film.
We're going to talk about that?
Yeah, because one of the things about Hacksaw Ridge is that it will be known for is that it has very, very graphic, violent war scenes. And the reason they do these really graphic, violent war scenes is to counterpoint the sort of sweetness of the beginning of the film. And I think, and in the similar way, I think Russell wants to show you the depravity with which the nuns indulge in order to counterpoint the faith with which Father Grandier keeps his faith at the end of the film when he's being burnt at the stake.
Sure.
And I think that's an important counterpoint. We often, one of the things that I find fascinating about censorship, and it's one of the most obvious things, is that we have a real high tolerance for violence, but we don't have a high tolerance for sexuality.
Is that a Western thing?
I think it's across the globe, although you could point to other countries which have much more permissive ideas about sexuality. Particularly, the film that pops in mind, which is one I've talked about in terms of censorship, is Nagase Oshima's In the Realm of the Censors, which is about people having sex while the war is going on. And it's very graphic in detail. And and it's not a film that's banned. And I think another reason why this film is banned is it's very heavy on sex. It's very graphic and detailed about sex, and it's not ordinary sex either. It's very
I also wouldn't call it detailed about sex. It's graphic.
It's very graphic, and I think. But the thing is, again, in most Western cultures and in most forms of censorship, we are very permissive about violence, about very graphic violence, but we're not permissive about sex. We tend to think, we need to show violence in order to show the brutality of a scene. But we don't ever say, we need to show sex in order to show the tenderness of a scene or to show how involved people are with each other.
Well, yeah, because we came from the people that founded this country were the people that were too prude for Britain.
And I think that is one of the reasons why, why you're like, well, I get it. I don't need to see it. But if we were talking about a violent scene where someone had their head decapitated, for example.
No.
You're like, they put it in and it really shows how graphic.
I disagree. You're putting words in my mouth at that point. I think what I'm saying is and
I'm not saying you personally. I'm saying,
okay.
Generally we would think
say,
that way.
Yeah. It'd be the same shit. So if this is a hyper-violent film and there was one fucking crazy hyper-violent scene that they cut out, we've talked about censorship a lot on this, but censorship's a weird thing. The second someone says something is censored, your gut reaction is, well, I want to see it. What the fuck? But at the same time, if I put my logic hat on for either of those things from a timing standpoint, if we're talking about this particular movie, I don't think it adds or detracts. To cut it out or cut out something else to put that in. I'm looking at it from an actual, let's construct a story and a narrative in this film. I think adding another scene of gratuitous whatever, if it's that or whatever, it's almost to the point where you're falling into your own trap you're setting.
Well, again, you're talking about a scene that you haven't seen yet, and I think the thing that is important in that scene is the way in which they take, which they're willing to invert the teachings of Christ. They literally grab the crucifix of Christ, which is the most sacred of images in the Catholic faith, and fornicate on it, and then Father Mignon engages in it as well. So, and again, I think that counterpoints what
And
happened.
then they burn Grandier. Okay.
But at the end of the film, Grandier holds on to his faith. He was like, God, don't leave me now. I need my faith in order to get through this. And what I think is interesting there is Grandier has the most faith amongst all these men. He is a true believer.
So they eventually get him, right? Because all these women are signing documents saying they were possessed and he laid with them as a demon and all this weird shit. Yeah. And he's like, what the fuck? And he was away, trying to save the town at the time a lot of this was going on. And then he came back. That wasn't exactly super clear in the film either, but I got it.
Yeah.
And then he comes back and they arrest him and they go through all of his shit. One thing I thought was very interesting. So they're in the process of arresting him and trying to prove that he's doing all this stuff. And they're just basically using these weird fucking rules. And then when they don't work, being like, the devil did it. He speechifies so beautifully a bunch of times in this movie. And there was one thing he said that I really liked. They ransacked his home. and they found letters. They found letters from like long lost like loves or like whatever, like women that he had courted or whatnot, yada, yada, yada. And he gives a great speech, and I think it's very fun. It's very sort of true, is that it's basically like, well, yeah, I was young, and this is how young people act, and this is what you look at when you're older. You take these and you keep them so that every once in a while you can look at them and remember what it felt like to sort of be young and be reckless.
We actually have that scene, and here it is.
Sick.
We have also letters from women who he did not marry. One of which appears to suggest that he committed sexual intercourse under the very roof of the church itself.
For the love of Jesus Christ! If you wish to destroy me, then destroy me. Accuse me of exposing political chicanery and the evils of the state, and I will plead guilty. But what man can face arraignments on the idiocy of youth? Old love letters and other pathetic objects stuffed in drawers or in the bottom of cupboards. Things kept for a day when he would need to be reminded that he was once loved.
Isn't Oliver Reed great? Isn't he just amazing?
I mean, look, he's one of the best actors in this film, no doubt. But yeah,
you're not a fan?
I like him. He's the most sort of grounded and I want to say real character in this kind of cacophony of like really hyper stylized people.
Mm-hmm.
And stylized in the way that you'd see in a play, in Shakespeare, like that sort of stylization, not necessarily bad, but just over the top in a good way. But I don't know. We're talking about all.
I just think he's masterful in this scene. I mean, I think.
Oh yeah, no. His speech. His speeches are the best part of this movie. There's no question.
Not just his speech, but I think he has a real command of the screen, and he is.
Well, that's part of the speeches. That's what I'm saying. I'm not just saying the words. I'm saying like
in his silence, he has a real command of the screen, and I think I buy him as I can understand why everybody's in love with that.
Look, I think he did a fantastic job acting. I think that the speeches that he delivered were great. I think they were very well written. I didn't get that, but I just took because everyone in the movie thought he was the most beautiful man alive. I was like, oh, he's the most beautiful man alive. Okay, like I get it.
I completely 100% board. And the thing,
are you possessed by the devil?
I am a little. Do have a little bit of a man crush on Oliver Reed right now, and I was
devil
into him.
Devil. Say something nice about the Marvel movies. You can't. You're a demon.
Okay, moving on.
See, I proved it. Yeah. Go get him. Where's our fucking exorcist?
So the other scene the rape of Christ is a major scene that was taken out, and there has been many attempts to revive the scene. It was thought to be lost for many years until Mark Kermode found a print of it. And there are many bastardized copies floating around on the internet if you're going to watch it. Anyway, the other scene that Ray even asked about was a scene that happened at the very end of the film, which again you wouldn't have seen. But
thanks, you're the one that gave me the damn movie.
When Laubardemont sees Sister Jeanne at the very end of the film, after they've burnt Urbain Grandier to the ground, he hands her a memento, which was a charred femur bone. And you would have seen that part, right? Yep. What you wouldn't have seen is that after Laubardemont leaves the room, Sister Jeanne masturbates with it.
Yeah, I probably figured that. I mean, I figured that would happen because she was basically giving herself enemas at the end of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, she's now, okay, rock and roll.
And it's a
rock and roll, Janine.
Beautiful scene.
Oh, yeah.
A beautifully disturbing scene because it's at the same time, it's also the first time she's actually met Grandier in a weird way. It's the first time she's actually been in the, actually been with him.
Hashtag get boned.
Yeah. So it's perverse and it's weird and it's disturbing, but it kind of sends you a reminder of how far Sister Jeanne has come by the end of this film.
Or gone.
Yeah.
The scene that was my favorite. And then I don't know, we should probably wrap it up because we're getting a little long in the tooth. But the scene that was my favorite was Louis XIII coming in when the orgy was like in full swing, and he comes in. He's like, "Oh, look at all this stuff," and he has like a young kid with him. I don't know who that was supposed to be.
I mean, it's one of Louis XIII's young
boys. And he's like, "Don't look at the women," blah blah blah, like whatever.
These fiendish creatures.
Yeah. So he comes in and he goes to bar. He's like, "I've brought something to help." and he has his little box. He's like, this contains, I got it from the deep, the treasure trove.
Blood of Christ.
It has a vial of Christ's blood, and Bear takes it and he goes over, and like 3 or 4 women are like instantly cured by it. And then he takes it back and he opens it up and it's empty, and he just laughs at them.
And we have that scene as well.
What?
Father, may I try this?
What is in the casket, sire?
A holy relic from the king's own chapel. A phial of the blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. What effect would the close proximity of this relic have on devils such as these?
It would put them to flight.
At once?
Immediately. Of course, I couldn't guarantee that when the relic was removed, they wouldn't return.
Oh, of course not. That would be asking too much. Would you care to try?
I'm free.
You are most welcome, my child.
You see.
You see, Father?
What sort of a trick have you played on us?
Oh, Reverend Sir, what sort of a trick are you playing on us?
Yeah, so like
What
he
kind of
basically
trick are you playing on us?
he basically calls them all out on. He's like, I know what you're doing's bullshit, but fuck it, whatever. You're
well,
like,
he's also he knows what's happening.
but he's just he literally proves to them and like all the people watching, like the townspeople that are watching this whole public thing, and then no one gives a shit.
Now, that actually happened in the novel as well, but it wasn't King Louis who did it. What happened in the novel that was really interesting was that all these bars started popping up and hotels started popping up because people turned up to watch
The tourist attraction.
Yeah, the tourist attraction to watch the exorcisms, and somebody turned up at one of the bars and did exactly that. He said, "I have a vial of Christ's blood. Will that cure the exorcism?" And they said, "Yes, of course it will." And then he tried it on one of the women, and she was supposedly cured, and it proved to him that this was all bullshit, and it proved to everyone around him that it was all bullshit. This didn't stop the exorcisms from happening.
That's why would it? The possessions.
Yeah.
So okay, Shahir, we watched this thing. You did a ton of research. The question I'd like to ask you is beyond the censorship, beyond the historical accuracy, beyond the interesting sort of footnote in history itself, should people seek out this hard to find movie and watch it?
I'm gonna take a line from I'm gonna borrow Warner Brothers' line, which is The Devils is not for everyone.
Okay.
It is definitely not for everyone, and I certainly agree with that. I think the people that might have an interest in this are people who are religious and are interested in cinema. I think those people might have an interest in this film. And then the other people that I think would be interested in it are cinema buffs, people who are completist about cinema. I think it falls into the category of films. The reason I like this film is, and this is going to sound weird, but it's a film I personally could never fathom myself making. Usually when I watch a movie, if I love a movie, I will dissect it and I'll be like, okay, this is how I would make it. If I watch this film, and there are a bunch of films like this, and I know I'm just using myself as a reference point, but I'm not saying that that's the only one.
I mean, that's never happened before. So,
but what I'm saying is that this to me is a type of cinema that is beyond my grasp of comprehension as a filmmaker. It is cinema. I call it the cinema of the deranged. It feels like it's one step from veering off the rails completely. And I get a real thrill from watching films where I'm like, I don't know what this filmmaker is doing. I don't understand. But then when I finish it, I know that they were completely in control of that film. And the films that I'm thinking about are The Holy Mountain by Alejandro Jodorowsky, Possession, even Bram Stoker's Dracula, Francis Ford Coppola's version of Dracula, Apocalypse Now, Heavenly Creatures. Those are films that are so close to veering off the rails that you're like, it's kind of a thrill ride to see if the filmmaker is actually in control or is it just nonsense. And when I watch this, I know that Ken Russell is completely in control of this film. He demonstrates beautifully that this is an exercise in depravity and in excess. and it's beautifully woven together. And having read Huxley's novel, I think this is a masterclass in adaptation. This is him taking all this disparate threads of this story that are political, cultural, historical, and he weaves them together so beautifully. And he's not just like retelling the story, he's also then escalating it into like this glorious kind of circus of events, and he's having fun, and it's just the soundtrack and the way he cuts the scenes together, and that the beautiful crash zooms.
I do like the crash zooms. The crash zooms are kind of dope.
In the Rape of Christ scene are really a demonstration of excess, and for me, that's why I would urge you to go and find this film. And seek it out. And there are many people who are calling for the release of this film. They do play it in theaters from time to time,
screaming from the rooftops while masturbating.
Well, there's a Facebook, there's a Twitter, a very active Twitter handle, hashtag Free the Devils, and a Facebook page as well, which is every year they're calling for the release of this film, but is Warner Brothers still. Even though Warner Brothers paid for this movie, they still won't release it. Guillermo del Toro has gone on record, and he works for Warner Brothers, and has slammed them on record for not releasing this film. Because Ken Russell is dead now. And the thing that's so disappointing is that he didn't get to see people watch the original cut of his film and enjoy it the way he wanted to. That said, I will, again, preface this with, this is not a film for everyone. This is not, if you're a Marvel film fan and that's all you watch, I'm not pointing at you, Matt. I know you watch a lot of other films, but I'm saying this is not the film for you. And if you're someone who is easily offended, I'm just going to say it, fuck it, don't watch this movie. This is not the movie for you. You will not enjoy it. So I'm also, I just want to say thank you to Ray for like asking us to watch this movie. You
made Little Shahir's week month. He's been I mean, it's funny. So I always watch Shahir talk about movies, and depending on what we are, he's sort of excited about it or not excited about it. But he's like, I don't know if you can feel the joy coming through of him talking about this movie, but like so Ray, you did a nice thing.
I love digging deep on movies and finding out about them and learning the history. And this is not a movie I'm particularly passionate about.
You seem like it.
I'm passionate about like the story behind this movie, and I'm passionate now that people get a chance to see it because I think it's a wonderful piece of cinema.
That brings me to my thing. I think it's a good movie, straight up. I don't think it's worth everyone, like you said, sort of hunting down sort of specific people and specific types, and if this has piqued your interest, go fucking see it. Go find any copy you can. But I do think it falls in that interesting category. But I'll sort of backtrack out of this of the subject matter being more interesting to me than the film itself, and that is not. But then, like even saying that, I thought that while I was watching it, and then here's the difference, and this is why I think this is an ostensibly good film. Okay. We mentioned Spotlight before, right? And my whole problem with Spotlight was the thing that gave Spotlight gravitas was the story that the people in the movie were telling a story about. I feel like that's taking a historical thing and not basically borrowing its importance and not doing it correctly.
I'm not going to engage with you in a Spotlight discussion.
No, that's fine. That's
100%.
I know you disagree, but I want to sort of transition it to this film.
Yeah.
This is a film that I do find the subject matter and the history of it far more interesting than I feel like the actual sort of craft of the film. But the craft of the film was done in such a way that you like exactly what you said. It's that it's going to go off the rails, but the dude's in control of it. Russell's in control of it. And when I finished this film, I was wavering back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And you can say whatever you want about it. You can like it or hate it. But this dude who made this movie knew exactly what he was doing and crafted something that was his vision of this story. And that is something I really do respect when you do something sort of not... You could look at this as just sort of sensationalism, but then you're not giving him his due in a strange way. And the reason I would say for people to see it is to see something that is sort of sensational, but its value is beyond that.
I think you need to be the kind of viewer who can go beyond the sensation to see what's underneath.
Right.
And
there's look, I've watched a lot of schlock. I've watched a lot of B shit, and I've watched a lot of stuff that like does shit like this, but for no fucking reason.
Yeah.
And those things are trashy and kind of garbagey, and like, you know, there's times to watch those, and I don't mind watching them from time to time too. But this is an ogre or an onion of a film, and it does have many layers. And if you like tearing things apart and sort of like in a good way and sort of deconstructing and figuring things out based on a million other little cues and hints, this is a nice little treasure trove of a film for you.
It's a surprisingly complex film. You know, like
yeah,
its view on religion is very complicated.
Yes. Although it does paint government and the way people abuse religion in a very clear way at the end.
I'm pretty sure that's the way it wants to discuss
yes.
this.
Anyway, guys, this has been probably the only podcast about the Devils.
No, this is a very talked about film.
But not on podcasts.
Because there's no other podcast.
Not in this reality.
Yeah.
Shahir, when you're not going enema balls deep into a movie that was requested for us, where can folks find you?
You can find me at shahirdaud.com. That's shahirdaud.com, where all my life and works are there. And Matt, where can we find you?
You can find me at matthewkroll.com, MATTHEWKROL.com for my stuff and or things. Also, Skeletor, the number 4, PREZ on Instagram, or Emperor MSK on Twitter, or just watching my eyes bleed as I do the new the new PlayStation VR. And by bleed, I mean with joy. It's fucking dope as shit. Actually, on my Instagram, Shahir, you should check this out too. One of my friends was playing it this weekend for the first time, and she's literally losing her mind.
Great. And you can find us at onlymoviepodcast.com as well. Please write us in. Dre, again, thank you so much for calling out this film. We hope people call out difficult and films like this to find. I mean, just even the search of finding this film was fun for me. So thank you again. And we have many more of these to come. We've got quite a growing list of requests.
We will get to them.
We will promise. One thing we're trying to do is bring in guests for some of those films as well, guests as they relate to those films.
But for this one, the guests were Shahir's books.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you all next week.
See you at the movies. Is that my new tag?
No, stop it.
No, that's this.
If I had a rolled up newspaper, I swear to Christ.
You would bop me in the head? That's a deep cut reference to this movie, if anyone can figure out what I'm talking about. Bop me in the head.
Or enemas.